Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of A Pastor, a Hippo, and a Manatee. My name's Pastor Matt Nuiver. I'm joined, as always, by my well-dressed friends, Sir Reginald, my hippopotamus, and Sir Neville, my manatee. And we are so glad that you could be here. We're thankful for those who have subscribed to our videos, and we hope that you'll like this one as well. We're going to read 2 books today and continue to learn how to sing Jesus Strong and Kind together. But our first book is entitled Where the Wild Things Are, a story and pictures by Maurice Sendak. It's a favorite in our house, and I hope that you like it too. The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind and another, his mother called him Wild Thing, and Max said, "I'll eat you up." So he was sent to bed without eating anything. That very night, in Max's room, a forest grew, and grew, and grew, until his ceiling hung with vines, and the walls became the world all around. And an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max, and he sailed off through the night and day, and in and out of weeks, and almost over a year, to where the wild things are. And when he came to the place where the wild things are, they roared their terrible roars, and gnashed their terrible teeth, and rolled their terrible eyes, and showed their terrible claws. Till Max said, "Be still," and tamed them with the magic trick of staring into all their yellow eyes without blinking once. And they were frightened, and called him the most wild thing of all, and made him king of all wild things. And now, cried Max, let the wild rumpus start. Rumpus! 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 Now stop, Max said, and sent the wild things off to bed without their supper. And Max, the king of all wild things, was lonely, and wanted to be where someone loved him best of all. Then all around, from far away across the world, he smelled good things to eat. So he gave up being king of where the wild things are. But the wild things cried, "Oh, please don't go. We'll eat you up. We love you so." And Max said, "No." The wild things roared their terrible roars, and gnashed their terrible teeth, and rolled their terrible eyes, and showed their terrible claws. But Max slipped into his private boat and waved goodbye, and sailed back over a year, and in and out of weeks, and through a day, and into the night of his very own room, where he found his supper waiting for him. And it was still hot. Where the Wild Things Are, story and pictures by Maurice Sendak. And while it's certainly a lesson to us not to be disrespectful to our moms and dads, it is a story of grace, that he was given his supper even though he didn't deserve it. And so we're thankful for the grace that our mom and dads give to us. Another story about grace that I want to talk to you about or read to you today is entitled The Priest with Dirty Clothes, and it's a book by R.C. Sproul. The Priest with Dirty Clothes. Where it says, Darby and Campbell McFarlane lived near a beautiful lake in Scotland called Loch Lomond. 7-year-old Darby was always finding ways to get herself and her little brother Campbell in trouble. One day after it had rained, they went outside to play. "Let's make mud pies," Darby said. The children pretended they were bakers. They found some mud and rolled it, patted it, and fashioned it into pretend cakes and pies. As they played, they wiped their hands on their clothes, spreading mud all over themselves. They laughed and giggled as they got muddier and muddier. When their mother saw them, she did not laugh. "Just look at you. You look like mud pies yourself," she cried. "Hurry and take off those filthy clothes, and I'll give you both a bath." After the children were clean, their mother looked at the muddy clothes. "I'll never be able to get these dirty clothes clean," she said to herself. Just then, there was a knock at the front door. It was the children's grandfather. As Darby and Campbell rushed in to hug him, Grandpa grinned and said, "It looks like someone made a mud pie bakery in the front yard." The children giggled. "It seems that our little bakers have ruined their clothes," Mom said. "That's too bad," Grandpa said. "But it reminds me of a strange and wonderful story." "Oh, tell us, please," Darby begged, pulling Grandpa toward the sofa. As soon as they were all seated, Grandpa began the story. Many years ago, in a faraway land, the people of a small village crowded into a large church. It was nighttime. The church was dark, except for the candles that were lit inside, casting shadows on the high walls. A young man named Jonathan was lying on the floor with his arms stretched out so that his body was in the shape of a cross. A great bishop prayed for him. This was the most important night of Jonathan's life. He was about to become a priest. At the end of the ceremony, the bishop gave Jonathan the special clothes of a priest. First, the bishop gave Jonathan a blue robe with a white hood and helped him put it on over his long brown robe made of scratchy wool. Then the bishop tied a white cord around Jonathan's waist. Now Jonathan was a priest. The very next week, Jonathan was invited to the castle of the king. He was to preach his first sermon to the royal household. Jonathan worked hard to prepare his sermon. He wanted it to be his very best. When it was time for Jonathan to go to the castle, it was raining very hard. Jonathan didn't want his new special clothes to get wet, but there was nothing he could do. He pulled the hood of his robe over his head and set out for the castle. As Jonathan and his horse made their way to the castle, the muddy road became more and more slippery. Suddenly the horse slipped and stumbled, and Jonathan fell off. Jonathan was not hurt, but he was muddy from head to toe. There was mud on his face and on his shoes. There was mud all over his blue robe. The white cord was no longer white. Jonathan was very upset. Jonathan tried hard to clean himself off, but there was no way he could clean his clothes and get to the castle on time. He thought about running away. He didn't want to preach in front of the king in such dirty clothes. The king just has to understand, he thought. So Jonathan kept going until he reached the castle. When he arrived, Jonathan hurried into the castle. He looked for a place to clean himself, but the tower bells began to ring. It was time for the royal household to gather to hear Jonathan's sermon. Slowly, Jonathan walked into the place where he was to stand and opened his Bible. As soon as the people saw Jonathan's dirty clothes, they began whispering. The king also was surprised to see the priest's mud-covered clothes. But the king was a king and a gentle ruler, and he could see that Jonathan was ashamed of his appearance. He knew that Jonathan must have a good reason for coming to the palace in such dirty clothes. At that very moment, the court magician, whose name was Malice, stood up and shouted, "Wait! This priest cannot preach before the king wearing those dirty clothes." Malice was a very mean man. He hated all priests. He even hated priests whose clothes were clean. Because he was powerful and mean, the people were afraid of him. As soon as Malice shouted out against Jonathan, other people began to yell mean things about Jonathan too. The king felt sorry for Jonathan. He didn't like the way Malice was behaving. He was afraid that Malice might cause someone to harm the priest. The king stood and said to the people, "Be calm, please. Stop talking. I will take care of this problem." The people grew still, silent. Even Malice stopped talking. The king then asked Jonathan to come forward. When Jonathan walked up to him, the king said, "Why did you come here in these dirty clothes?" Jonathan explained what had happened. The king nodded and said, "I understand. I am sorry that you had this accident. You cannot preach here today wearing such dirty clothes. But I will give you another chance. You may come back next week and preach, but only if you wear clean clothes." "Thank you, your majesty," Jonathan said. "I am sorry. I am so dirty. I promise that next week I will be clean." Jonathan left the castle as fast as he could. When he got home, the first thing he did was to try to clean his clothes. But the stains were so deep he couldn't get them out. The more he tried to clean his clothes, the worse they looked. They were so dirty. They looked like his old scratchy brown robe. The next day, Jonathan took his special clothes to the town fuller. The fuller was a man who cleaned people's dirty clothes. He had special soaps that could get mud out of clothing. The fuller looked at Jonathan's clothes and said, "These clothes are so dirty, I don't know if I can make them clean. But I will do my best. Come back tomorrow." When Jonathan returned to the fuller's shop, the fuller said, "I am afraid that I cannot make your clothes clean. They are ruined forever. The only thing you can do is to get new clothes." "But I can't get new clothes," Jonathan said. "These clothes were given to me by the bishop. He only gives out one set of clothes." "I am sorry about that," the fuller said, "but there is nothing more I can do. You should go to see the bishop. Maybe he can give you a new set of clothes so you can preach before the king." Jonathan didn't think the bishop would give him a new set of clothes, but he had to ask, so he went straight to the bishop's office. The bishop patiently listened to Jonathan's story. Then he said, "This is a sad thing that has happened to you, Jonathan, but there is nothing I can do to help you." Jonathan was very sad. "Isn't there something I can do to get clean clothes?" he asked. "Please let me do something special to earn new clothes." The bishop's face was sad. "No, Jonathan," he said. "The rules are clear. There is nothing you can do on your own to earn a new set of clothes. The only person who can help you is the great prince. Perhaps you should speak to him." The bishop gave Jonathan the directions to the palace of the great prince. Jonathan carefully followed the directions until he came to the palace where the great prince lived. He asked a guard for permission to see the prince, and the guard escorted Jonathan to the great hall where the prince was sitting on a throne. When Jonathan saw the prince, he was amazed. The prince was dressed in a long purple robe with precious jewels on it. There was a band around his waist made of pure gold. His face seemed to shine like the sun. Jonathan had never seen anyone like him. The prince looked at Jonathan with caring eyes. "Why are you here?" he asked in a voice that was soft and kind. "What do you need from me?" Jonathan said, "O great prince, I am a new priest. I am to preach a sermon to the king's household, but I have ruined my clothes, and I cannot stand in front of the king without clean clothes. No one has been able to make my clothes clean. Is there anything you can do to help me?" Jonathan told the prince how his clothes had become dirty. The prince listened quietly, then said to Jonathan, "I understand your problem, and I can help you." "Are you going to give me clean clothes?" Jonathan asked. "You will soon see, Jonathan," the prince replied. "But first, come with me to the fireplace." Jonathan followed the prince to the corner of the room, where a small fire was burning in the fireplace. The prince pointed to a small branch at the edge of the fire. The branch had been partly burned, but it was no longer hot. The prince told Jonathan to pick up the branch. Jonathan reached down and picked up the branch. He held it and looked at it. It was black and charred. When the prince said Jonathan could put it down again, Jonathan put it back beside the fire. Then the prince said, "Now look at your hand." Jonathan looked down and saw that his hand was black. It was covered with soot from the branch. "Jonathan," the prince said, "you are like the branch you pulled from the fire. You are covered with dirt, but the dirt is not just on your clothes, it is on your heart. Sin, the wrong things that you do, makes your heart dirty. No soap can make it clean." Then the prince said, "Jonathan, I can help you. Go to the castle next week and be ready to preach your sermon. Wear your dirty clothes. I will take care of them." Jonathan felt sad and afraid. "But great prince," he said, "the king said I could not stand in front of him in my dirty clothes. And the evil magician Malice will do something mean to me if I enter the castle with dirty clothes." A warm smile spread across the face of the great prince. "Yes, Jonathan, I know all about Malice and his meanness," he said. "I also know the king very well. You see, Jonathan, the king is my father." Jonathan asked, "How are you going to make my clothes clean?" The prince answered, "I promised you that I will take care of that. I never break my promises. I always do what I say I will do. Now go home and get ready for your sermon. I will be there and I will do what I promised." When the next week came, Jonathan was both excited and a little afraid. He thought about not going to the castle at all. Then he remembered the promise the prince had made to him. "I will trust in the promise of the prince. I will go to the castle," he said to himself. Jonathan went outside and got on his horse. This time the day was bright with sunshine. There were no storm clouds in the sky. Jonathan had no trouble making the journey to the castle. When he got there, he could see a crowd of people going in. Jonathan swallowed hard and walked inside to the place where he was to stand and preach. But just as soon as Jonathan took his position, Malice stood up and shouted, "May bad things happen to you, O priest. You are still wearing dirty clothes." The king looked at Jonathan and frowned. "Why are you here again with dirty clothes?" the king asked. "I told you that you could not stand in front of me looking like that again." Jonathan felt ashamed. His face turned red. He could not even answer the king. The people began to whisper. Some shouted loudly, "Go away!" At that moment, someone came into the room. It was a man dressed in a scratchy brown robe, exactly like the robe Jonathan wore under his special clothes. The man was carrying a present under his arm. At first, no one recognized the stranger. Then someone shouted, "It's the great prince." Malice didn't know what to think. He asked, "What is the meaning of this? Why are you here, and why are you wearing that itchy robe?" The prince did not answer. He was smiling as he walked to the front of the room and stood next to Jonathan. Then the prince handed Jonathan the present and told him to open it. Everyone watched Jonathan as he carefully opened the gift the prince had given to him. Jonathan's eyes grew wide when he saw what it was. It was the perfect present. Inside were the beautiful clothes that belonged to the prince. The prince smiled again at Jonathan and said, "These are the clean clothes I promised you. They are yours forever. They will never wear out. There is not a spot of dirt on them, and nothing can make them dirty. They are perfect for you." Then the prince said to Jonathan, "Take off your dirty clothes and give them to me." Jonathan took off his dirty clothes and gave them to the prince, and the prince put them on himself. Next, the prince said, "Put on my clothes and preach your sermon." Jonathan's hands shook as he put on the prince's beautiful clothes. When Jonathan was dressed, the prince said to the king, "Father, may Jonathan now stand in your presence. He is one of my people." The king was pleased. He said to the prince, "Yes, my son, as long as he wears your clothes, he may stand in front of me." Jonathan was filled with joy. "How can I ever thank you for being so kind to me?" he asked the prince. The prince said, "If you are really thankful, and if you want to show that you love me, then keep all the commandments that I give to you." "Oh, I will," Jonathan said. "I want to be good enough to wear your clothes." "But you cannot be good enough, Jonathan. You must live your whole life trusting in my goodness while you wear my clothes." On that day, Jonathan preached his best sermon ever, and he spent the rest of his life preaching about the great prince. He wore the prince's perfect present until the day he died. Grandpa turned to Darby and Campbell and said, "That is the end of my story. Did you like it?" "Oh, yes," the children replied. "Do you think that if we could find the great prince, that he would give us clean clothes too?" "Yes," Grandpa answered. "He gives clean clothes to everyone who believes in him. But they are not clothes like the ones you ruined today. The great prince gives new clothes for our hearts." The dirt that we get on our clothes can sometimes be washed away, but we have a bigger problem. When we sin and do wrong, our hearts become so dirty that we cannot stand in front of God. For us to be able to be friends with God, we need to have the dirt on our hearts cleaned away. This is what Jesus does for us. He forgives us by taking the dirt from our hearts and putting it on himself. Just like the great prince took Jonathan's dirty clothes and wore them. So when God looks at us, he doesn't see the dirt on our hearts. Instead, he sees a heart covered by his son's clean clothes. If you trust in Jesus and believe his word, your heart will be clean. Jesus will forgive you when you sin, but you have to ask him to forgive you. Then he cleans your heart, and you can stand in front of God forever. I'm sorry we got mud on our clothes, but I'm sure glad we heard the story about the great prince, Darby said. With a hug, her mother said, "Yes, it is a story we all need to hear and remember." And so that story about Jesus being able to take our sin, our dirt, and clean it all away and exchange his robes for ours, it's a great blessing to us. And I pray that that's something you believe, that you ask God to forgive you, our Father, to forgive all your sins for Jesus' sake, that Jesus would give you his robes of righteousness, and that we would rejoice in being clean in him. Well, let's sing a song together as we close our time. We started learning last week the song Jesus Strong and Kind. We learned verse 1 and the chorus, and today we're going to learn verse 2. And so if you want to look at that first video again to be reminded of verses 1 and the chorus, that's great. But verse 2 goes like this. Jesus said, "If I am weak, I should come to him. No one else can be my strength. I should come to him." And so I'll put the words underneath as I'm singing, but we'll sing verse 1 and then verse 2, and then we'll review the chorus. So verse 1, verse 2, and then the chorus. Jesus strong and kind. Jesus said that if I thirst, I should come to him. No one else can satisfy, I should come to him. Jesus said, if I am weak, I should come to him. No one else can be my strength. I should come to him. For the Lord is good and faithful. He will keep us day and night. We can always run to Jesus, Jesus strong and kind. And so that's verse 2, as well as verse 1, and the chorus of Jesus strong and kind. On behalf of Sir Reginald and Sir Neville, I'm Pastor Nuiver. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. For a pastor, a hippo, and a manatee, we pray that you are blessed through the song we could sing, and through the books that we can read. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Blessings, and may you cry out to Jesus that your clothes would be clean in him. We'll see you next time.